Star Destroyer Gilgamesh coming out of light speed. Time to empty the trash compactor. Star Destroyer Gilgamesh entering the system.
The Emperor wants to know how long until we're in orbit.
It's going to be complicated. I have to calculate. This is not an easy planet to orbit. Tell the Emperor that we'll be pulling in as soon as possible. I'll start my calculations right now.
I'll inform the Emperor.
Why aren't we in orbit?
Your Highness, it's a bit of a mess. This planet, Earth, its motion doesn't calculate according to whole numbers. So it has a moon, but the moon only moves around it 29 and a half cycles per day. So it messes everything up, and then it takes the planet 365 and a quarter days to get around, and the relationship between the moon and the sun just mess everything up. So I'm having real difficulty.
Your lack of calculations disturb me. Take them away.
Oh no! No, Your Majesty, have mercy, have mercy. Boker Tov, and welcome to our newest edition of DIY Judaism, Do It Yourself. This particular episode is brought to you by my Flower Mound Police Department Chaplain Corps mug, so that you know that we are doing wonderful things outside the walls of this synagogue. So, what I'm here to talk to you about is about the luach, the Hebrew word which means the tablet, but also means the calendar. The Jewish calendar is a tremendous mystery to most of us, and it baffles us. All we know is that everything keeps falling at the wrong side of Western holidays, and we can't make heads or tails out of it. So I'm going to try and explain to you how to be able to successfully interpret and anticipate Jewish holidays based on the Jewish calendar. So we begin with the Bible. This is the earliest discussion of the Hebrew calendar, and at that time it becomes clear that we use a lunar calendar. We are basing our holidays and our observances of months based on the cycles of the moon. Now, we know a little bit more about how important this was because in the 10th century, we encounter something called the Gezer calendar. So a calendar in Judaism is called a luach, just like a tablet, like the 10 Commandments are a tablet, a luach. So are the original teachings of our calendar. And we have found an object, it was found in 1908, known as the Gezer calendar. And the Gezer calendar is the first evidence of the use of a calendar system by the ancient Hebrews. It's also an incredibly important text because it seems to be a transitional text between Canaanite language and Hebrew. So somewhere around the 10th century, the first Hebrews were learning how to read and write. And in the process of doing that, they converted what we would think of as the Phoenician calendar into the Hebrew calendar. So what's going on? What's going on is if we go to the months, we discover that the cycle of the moon, the astronomical observation of the moon, is the basis for how we calculate our months. In the Western calendar, we've come up with this very strange system where all months are 30 days or 31 days, except for February, which is 28 days, unless you want to add a leap day. Jewish calendar doesn't do that. The actual motion of the moon runs about 29 and a half days. So all 12 Jewish months are either 30 or 29 days. It's that simple. Keeps things very simple. On the other hand, that creates a separate problem because the motion of the moon around the earth is not in any way coordinated with the motion of the earth around the sun. And of course, the seasons depend on our motion around the sun. So if we count 12 months of 29 or 30 days, we end up at the end of a full cycle of 12 moons with 354 days. But we know that in fact, a solar year is 365 and a quarter days. So, what happens if you follow a purely lunar calendar is that gradually the months will move further and further behind, and as a result, the seasons will change in relationship to the holidays. And if you use what's effectively a merchant's calendar, like the Islamic tradition does, that doesn't matter because you're not concentrating on agriculture. You're just following the cycles of the moon for the purposes of moving across the planet and selling. And that to this day, the Islamic calendar is a purely lunar calendar. On the other hand, for Jews and Israelites living in the land of Israel, we have to know when the planting season begins, when the harvesting season begins. They should all fall roughly in the same calendric period. So, in order to reconcile between the lunar calendar and the solar calendar, what we have done is we implemented way back when a system of leap months. So, 9 out of 17, or flip that, 7 out of 19 years, we will add an additional month to the calendar. This is second Adar. Adar, the month with the holiday of Purim, is at the very end of the cycle before the spring begins again with Nisan and Pesach. And so it's very simple, since those two holidays are 1 month apart from each other, to insert a 13th month. Now, the result of this is that then Purim is moved into second Adar, and the two holidays remain exactly 1 month apart. Got it so far? All right. The problem with that is, for us who live by the Western calendar, is we discover it seems like Jewish holidays move forward and backwards almost at random. And that is because of the occasional addition of a leap month. If we lived entirely by the Hebrew calendar, this would not be an issue. These holidays always fall at the same time every year. It might be a hot fall or it might be a cool fall, but it wouldn't affect us at all. It's only because we live in two worlds that we find this a problem. It's like what Mark Twain said, right? That a man who has two watches is never really sure what time it is. And that's exactly our challenge. So, how did we deal with this? In the Talmud teaches us about this system, and they base it on direct observations of both the moon and the sun. This has pragmatic limitations. So by the 5th century, they started coming out with a system of mathematically calculated days. And this is a comprehensive Hebrew calendar that can guide you through this. Now, these calculations are insanely difficult. I made the mistake as a student of thinking, oh, I'll just read through and I'll figure out how this works. And I started reading the process of determining these calculations and all the rules and things involved in it, and it is mind-numbingly confusing. All right, so thankfully there are other people, drudges and boring people, who are obsessed with these things and like to work them out for us. All right, and of course this created other issues, because originally the astronomical observation meant that there might be a delay. There are always 2 full moons every month. So is the first time we get to see it the first full moon, really? Or did clouds prevent us from seeing it? And also, how do we communicate in a pre-modern world that the month has started? So this is the beginning of the tradition of the double holiday observance, where we have a first day and a second day, for example, of Pesach, first day and second day of Sukkot, etc., etc. However, once we got the mathematical calculations, this became redundant. This became unnecessary. And so one of the things that splits the Reform movement and modern Israel off from Jewish tradition is that we all base ourselves on the mathematical calculations rather than on the old principle of the double observance of the holiday. So that has resulted in Reform calendars and Israeli calendars marking the holidays. So, it's a 7-day holiday for Pesach, while the traditional practice is an 8-day. Is it confusing? Darn tootin' it is. You know, if Jews wanted to find something to argue about that was really pedantic, it's about calculating the calendar, and that's what we do. But we do have these resources available to us, and in fact, these are 20th century resources. On the 21st century, you can go to your phone, your smartphone, you can find an app, you have a way of guiding you. Nevertheless, I want to take you through and show you how this works. So, in terms of a month, we always begin with what's called Rosh Chodesh, the head of the month. And in Jewish tradition, the head of the month is the new moon. For those of you who don't spend a lot of time studying moon rules, that's when there's no visible moon, all right? And there is a special bracha lavana, a blessing for the moon that is recited at Rosh Chodesh. And there is a ritual for doing that if you observe it. Then the month goes through, and in the middle of the month, you are on the 14th and 15th of every Jewish month when you see the full moon. And indeed, quite a number of our holidays are completely geared to that full moon. Pesach, for example, begins on the full moon. Now, it turns out that Pesach this year started on the second day of the full moon, not on the first day of the full moon. Don't worry about it. It's okay. It's just that they have to make little adjustments because the earth doesn't move in whole numbers, and things have to be tweaked according to the observance of other holidays. So there's a little scooting that goes on, but we don't have to worry about that because there is always available to us a Hebrew calendar. Now, until very recently, the Jewish calendar has been intimately associated with death. And that's because here in America, it's always funeral homes that publish our calendars. They very nicely donate them to us. But there we go. We get to flip through this calendar every month thinking about who's going to die next. All right? Now that we have smartphones, we don't have to worry about that anymore. But now let's zero in. And if you look at a calendar, for example, this is, we are looking at September 2019. This marks here on this calendar, it says the second day of Rosh Chodesh of the month of Elul. So, if you're looking at one of these calendars, there's the Western date up there, and the Jewish date appears below. Now, it just so happens on this month, the numbers of the month coincide with the fall month in the Western calendar. However, often that is not the case. So, for example, let's, okay, so here, if we were to look at January, back at January 2020, Rosh Chodesh occurs on the 27th, all right? So what you just need to do is read the instructions and follow along, and it will set the calendar. Now, you'll notice there's also, on Fridays, they put in there a symbol of Shabbat candles. Shabbat candles and their lighting, again, based on a pre-modern practice when we didn't have clocks in our pockets and information beaming to us across the skies. The way to determine when the Sabbath began was to make an astronomical observation. When you could see a minimum of 3 stars appear in the dusk sky, that officially signaled the beginning of Shabbat. And of course, because of the nature of the shifting seasons, that time moves. It moves a little later in the day as we go through spring into summer, and then as we go out of summer and into fall and winter, it gets a little earlier each time. So night extends and daylight shrinks. So in the traditional Jewish world, you will find that people will still follow the pattern of starting Shabbat at a certain set time. Again, we can now mathematically and astronomically calculate when that time is. And if you ever spend your time looking around on the internet, you'll discover, oh, sunset in Dallas will happen at 6:15, and then the next week it'll be 6:18, and then it'll be 6:23, etc., like that, and it will cycle through. So if you are a traditionally observant Jew, you're not going to light the candles until you see that time. However, again, the Reform movement embraced the idea that we can accurately calculate things, and more important than that, we have changed our way of observing time. We now live in a world where we regiment time according to work and according to regularly planned schedules. As a result, Congregation Kol Ami, to take an example, always begins its Shabbat services at 7:30, because that's how we deal with time most effectively now. When we know that a time is coming, it's going to be the same time, just like getting to work, just like watching a television show, we set that time. Now, at some points in the year, that means we're going to be starting Shabbat after the sun has set. In some cases, during the summer, that pushes the beginning of the Shabbat while the sun is still setting. If that's important to you, then you should use your Jewish calendar to anticipate when you should properly light the lights. However, the Reform position is that we simply work with the modern schedule and we regulate it so that it happens the same time every week. So that's an important thing for us to understand about that. Now, always be aware that the holidays, about half of our major holidays are marked by a full moon. So when you see the full moon, if you haven't otherwise thought about it, it's time to panic, because maybe there's a Jewish holiday happening. So you go out and walk your dog, you see a full moon, you go, oh my gosh, am I missing something? And it's a good reminder. Now, most of the time it will be fine. You're just making yourself temporarily anxious for nothing, but every once in a while, there's going to be an important holiday happening at the full moon, Purim, Pesach, Sukkot. So always pay attention to the moon and appreciate the fact that the beauty and rhythm of Judaism is constructed around the beauty and the rhythm of the natural world. That's how Jews move through the world, with one foot on earth, experiencing the earthly nature of our existence, and with one foot in the heavens, always looking up and finding inspiration, and using our noggins, our kepes, to understand all of the difficulties and sophistications of our world is one of the great gifts of Judaism. So, you don't have to figure out the Sod HaLuach, the secrets of the calendar. It's done for somebody, by somebody else, but it's good for you to know how to access it and how to use it. You can do it in paper, you can do it online, but it's always available, and there's something very, very potent about participating in the rhythms of the Jewish calendar. So, thank you for attending this session. Beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life down here.